They called it the most sophisticated predatory fraud network ever dismantled on American soil. $900 million. Stolen not with guns, not with violence, stolen with a telephone, a script, and a voice that sounded kind. 41,000 elderly Americans targeted. Retirement savings wiped out. Life insurance policies drained. Medical funds emptied. And behind every single call, a cartel. This is not a scam story. This is a cartel infiltration story. And before this is over, you will understand that what happened in Los Angeles was not just theft. It was engineered. It was protected. And it went all the way to the top of California's Border Enforcement Command. Stay with us. Because the next part is worse than you think. 3:17 in the morning. East Los Angeles. The streets are almost empty. A few delivery trucks idling near a loading dock. Orange sodium lights painting the wet asphalt in tired colors. A dog somewhere behind a chain-link fence barking at nothing. Or maybe at everything. 3 blocks east of Olympic Boulevard, inside a converted industrial printing warehouse with blacked-out windows and reinforced steel doors. Approximately 340 workstations are still fully active. Screens glowing. Headsets on. And more than 200 workers, some barely adults, reading from laminated call scripts in Spanish and English. Dialing numbers from stolen Medicare databases, ARP. Membership rolls and Social Security leak lists sold on the dark web for 42 cents per verified senior citizen contact. They are not sleeping. They never stop between midnight and 5 a.m. Because that is when the elderly answer the phone, confused, lonely, afraid, and trusting. Outside, on 4 converging streets, they are already moving. FBI Special Operations Vehicles. DIA Tactical Units. ICE Enforcement Teams. DIS Homeland Security Investigations Agents. 3 separate SWAT teams in full black gear, moving without lights, on foot, in absolute silence. 47 federal vehicles staged 2 blocks in every direction. A command helicopter circling at altitude with thermal imaging locked onto every heat signature inside the building. The operation is called Project Ghost Ledger. And tonight, it ends. 4:02 a.m., 3 entrances, 1 roof access point. Simultaneous breach. The flashbangs hit first. 4 of them. The sound is like the world cracking open. And then the doors come down, not slowly, not dramatically, just gone, blown inward by hydraulic battering rams in under 2 seconds. And suddenly the inside of that warehouse is flooded with federal agents in black tactical gear moving like a controlled flood through every corridor, every aisle, every supervisor station. Workers freeze. Headsets still on, some still mid-sentence on calls to grandmothers in Phoenix and Indianapolis and rural Georgia who will never know how close a federal agent came to hearing their voice that night. Some workers run. A handful sprint toward a rear exit that opens into a narrow alley and find 12 ICE agents already waiting there. Calm, weapons raised, instructing them to stop in 2. Languages. A shift supervisor in a red polo shirt tries to shove a laptop into a ceiling vent. He does not finish. 3 supervisors attempt to access a server room in the northwest corner of the building. They find the door already open, federal forensics technicians already inside, hard drives already tagged and sealed in anti-static evidence bags. 207 arrests. In under 19 minutes, but that is not the discovery that stops the agents cold. In the sub-basement, access through a hidden drop floor beneath a supply closet, the kind of thing that does not appear on any building permit or architectural plan. Federal. Agents find something that has nothing to do with telemarketing. Sealed steel containers. A communication relay server running encrypted satellite uplinks, 3 separate burner phone banks with pre-programmed routing that bounces signals through servers registered in Belize, Malta, and a ghost telecom node in Tijuana, and a locked fireproof cabinet containing physical ledgers, handwritten, column by column, that document money transfers, coded recipient names, route clearances, and a set of authorization stamps belonging not to any known cartel member, but to a California state border enforcement official. The agents do not speak for a long moment. They just read. And then one of them picks up a radio and says, quietly, "We need the forensics director down here. Right now. 6:55 a.m. FBI Cyber Forensics Division. Federal Building, downtown Los Angeles." The room smells like cold coffee and dry recycled air. 12 analysts are already working when the hard drives from the warehouse arrive. They have been working since 2 a.m. on the digital pre-seizure data extracted remotely from the building's own network, a passive intercept running for 61 days before the raid. By 8:30 a.m., the lead analyst, a quiet woman who has spent 11 years cracking cartel financial architecture, is standing in front of a projection wall that covers the entire east side of the room. She does not look surprised. She looks like she has been waiting a long time to show someone this. The network diagram fills the screen. It has a name at the top, Project Ghost Ledger, and beneath it, a web of connections that makes the room go absolutely silent. 43 shell companies registered across California, Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. Ghost corporations with names like Pacific Crest Wellness Solutions and Suncrest Senior Care Partners and Golden Valley Telecommunications Consulting, all legitimate on paper. All registered with state agencies, several of them actually receiving federal grant funding through a low-income digital access initiative signed into law 3 years prior. Offshore accounts in Panama. In the Cayman Islands, in a private bank in Cyprus that has appeared in 4 previous DIA financial investigations and survived all 4. Sham charitable foundations with 501c3 status that have never spent a single documented dollar on charitable work but have processed over $218 million in laundered wire transfers. Restaurant chains in the San Fernando Valley, a logistics firm operating out of the Port of Long Beach. A recycling company with 3 facilities near the I-5 corridor, and a maintenance contract with 2 California county governments. And at the center of it all, flowing in, flowing out, always moving, Sinaloa cartel money. Sinaloa cartel instructions. Sinaloa cartel logistics support for the call center operation, including the recruitment pipeline that brought workers in from across the border, the legal cover structure that kept the building's public-facing permits clean, and a network of corrupted inspectors who had visited that warehouse 14 times in 3 years and never filed a single violation. But the financial web is not the worst part. The worst part is the name that keeps appearing in the transfer authorizations, in the encrypted routing commands, in the sub-basement ledger. Always the same digital signature key, always the same coded authorization prefix. Belonging to a man named Director Armand Vasco, fictional head of California's Border Security Coordination Office. A man who, for the past 4 years, has appeared at press conferences announcing cartel crackdowns. A man who has been photographed shaking hands with senators and receiving a commendation from the governor's office. A man who, the analysts now realize, has been quietly turning California's border enforcement architecture into a Sinaloa cartel service structure. Route clearances timed for cartel logistics convoys. Patrol grid modifications filed as routine administrative updates that created unmonitored corridors along the I-8 and I-10 during specific 12-hour windows. Internal alerts about federal surveillance operations, not leaked carelessly, but delivered through an encrypted messaging relay buried inside the state emergency management system, sent directly to Sinaloa coordination cells 48 to 70, 2 hours before every scheduled federal interdiction. And the call center itself. The elderly fraud operation generating $900 million. It was not simply a criminal enterprise the cartel tolerated. It was a designed cash flow mechanism, a revenue engine. Money harvested from the most vulnerable Americans, laundered through 43 shell structures, and repatriated into Sinaloa cartel operational funding for drug trafficking. Infrastructure, human smuggling routes, and tunnel construction along the Southern California border. The lead analyst looks at the room and says something that will later be repeated in the federal indictment. This is not corruption. This is command-level collusion. Armand Vasco did not look the other way. He designed the road they drove on. She pauses. And we have not reached the bottom of this yet. 5:44 a.m. The following morning. Federal Joint Operations Command Center, Riverside County. The room is vast. 62 federal personnel working in shifts. At the front, a digital map the size of a theater screen. Across it, 67 red markers pulse in slow rhythmic beats like a second heartbeat. Los Angeles, San Bernardino, Fresno, Bakersfield, Stockton, San Diego, the Inland Empire Corridor, the agricultural flatlands of the Central Valley, coastal shipping facilities near Ventura and Oxnard, 67 known Sinaloa network positions in California, all connected, all under Director Vasco's protection umbrella, all active as of 72 hours ago. Today, they all go down together. The mission commander, a DIA special agent in charge who has spent 22 years working cartel operations from Jerez to Chicago, steps to the front of the room at 5:55 a.m. and addresses the assembled federal force with 9 words. Every team confirms ready. We start in 5 minutes. 1,140 federal agents, 41 SWAT teams, 18 DIA tactical units, ICE Homeland Security Investigations strike cells operating in every identified corridor, DIS aerial support with 6 helicopters, California Highway Patrol units federally deputized and operating under FBI command protocols, 2 National Guard logistics support units, and positioned along the southern maritime approaches in the border corridor near San Diego and Imperial County, U.S. Navy coastal interdiction vessels coordinating with Border Patrol Marine units to seal water-adjacent smuggling approaches. At 6 a.m. exactly, 67 operations begin simultaneously across the state of California. In a warehouse district in San Bernardino, agents breach a Sinaloa-controlled methamphetamine superlab disguised behind a legitimate commercial dry cleaning operation. Inside, federal chemists will later document over 4,000 kilograms of methamphetamine in various stages of processing, along with precursor chemicals stockpiled in. Quantities sufficient for 3 additional production cycles. The lab has been operational for approximately 26 months. It has never been inspected. In the Calabasas Hills north of Los Angeles, agents surround a fortified residential compound registered to a Pacific Crest Wellness Shell entity. The compound has 12 rooms, 4 armed security personnel on overnight rotation, and a server room containing 3 operational communication hubs connecting directly to Sinaloa coordination networks in Culiacan. In a basement vault, agents recover approximately $31 million in U.S. currency, vacuum sealed and stacked in a formation so precise it looks architectural. Near the I-8 corridor in eastern San Diego County, a joint FBI ICE team moves on a known tunnel access point, a warehouse presenting publicly as an agricultural equipment storage facility. The tunnel beneath it is 940 feet long. Reinforced concrete walls, ventilation and lighting systems, a rail cart system for moving cargo. At its terminus, a concealed entry point in an industrial zone on the Mexican side. In the last 6 months, this tunnel has moved an estimated 2.1 million fentanyl pills, over 300 kilograms of cocaine, and has been used as a human trafficking and migrant smuggling transit corridor for organized groups. In Bakersfield, a cartel-operated trucking company publicly contracted for Central Valley agricultural hauling is raided at its depot. 17 trucks. In 11 of them, agents find hidden compartments welded into frame sections containing fentanyl, heroin, and cocaine, packaged for distribution to Northern California networks. In Stockton, a human trafficking transit house, presented as a residential rental property, is cleared by a joint ICE and FBI victim rescue team. Inside, 23 migrants in deplorable conditions, held as debt-bonded labor, some having been moved through the call center operation as low-wage workers before being transferred to other criminal enterprises. Every one of them is taken immediately to federal care. And in downtown Los Angeles, 6 blocks from City Hall, federal agents arrest Director Armin Vasco at 6:08 a.m. as he exits the elevator of a luxury condominium building. He is in a pressed suit. He is carrying a coffee. He says nothing as the handcuffs close. He knows. He has known something was coming. What he did not know was how complete the evidence against him already is. By noon, the results are totaled. 211 additional arrests beyond the call center operation. 44 senior Sinaloa cartel operatives in California. 12 local law enforcement personnel, 3 county officials, 1 state-level contracting administrator, and Director Armin Vasco himself. Narcotics seized: over 8 tons of methamphetamine, 900 kilograms of cocaine, 2.1 million fentanyl pills, and 160 kilograms of heroin. Cash seized: approximately $47 million across all locations. The underworld absorbed more damage in 6 hours than in the previous 6 years. The next 72 hours inside the federal investigation tell a story that is harder to absorb than the drug seizures and the arrests, because the numbers and the raids are one thing. What the seized servers reveal is something else entirely. Analysts examining communications recovered from the Calabasas compound and from Director Vasco's encrypted devices reconstruct a shadow enforcement system operating in parallel to California's legitimate border and law enforcement infrastructure. 29 local law enforcement officers on confirmed Sinaloa payroll. 7 Border Patrol agents, paid between $8,000 and $22,000 per month, who had been systematically falsifying patrol logs to create movement windows. For cartel logistics operations, 3 superior court clerks who had been selectively delaying warrant processing for operations targeting Sinaloa-adjacent locations. 2 state legislators' staffers who had passed internal information about forthcoming border security appropriations, allowing Vasco's operation to pre-position resources and create bureaucratic obstacles before increased federal scrutiny could take hold. The patrol grid falsifications alone, border surveillance schedules quietly adjusted, drone coverage corridors shifted by small administrative modifications, had created what analysts describe as a systematically engineered blind sector along a 62-mile stretch of the California-Baja corridor. Not a gap in enforcement, a designed pathway, maintained, updated, and defended by people wearing badges and drawing government salaries. In the call center records, investigators find something that cuts through even the hardened federal agents who have seen the worst of what organized crime can do. Victim logs. Detailed files kept on individual elderly targets, names, ages, psychological notes about which emotional appeals worked on each person, documentation of how much money had been extracted and how much more was estimated to remain. Accessible. One file documents a 78-year-old retired schoolteacher in Sacramento who was contacted 41 times over 9 months and who transferred her entire savings. $114,000 before a family member discovered what was happening. She is one of 41,000, and every single one of their stolen dollars passed through Vasco's protection infrastructure on its way to Sinaloa operational accounts. A veteran FBI agent who has worked organized crime for 18 years reads through the victim logs and then steps outside the forensics building and does not come back in for 40 minutes. When he does, he walks directly to the case supervisor and says, "I want every one of those victim files cross-referenced with any cold case financial fraud complaints that was." filed with California authorities in the last 4 years and never acted on. Every single one. They run the cross-reference. They find 218 formal complaints filed properly, processed into the system, and then routed through a digital case management module administered by Vasco's office into a designation category internally coded as low-priority financial matter. Inactive, every one of them buried, deliberately, systematically. A retired sheriff's deputy in the cyber crimes unit looks at the routing data and says the thing everyone in the room is thinking: this was not a police department that failed. This was a second police department, one that worked for the cartel, making sure the first one never got close. He pauses. The badge will be rebuilt. But we have to be honest about how far down it went before we can start. Zoom out from California. Zoom out past the desert and the mountain corridors and the coastal shipping lanes. What Project Ghost Ledger reveals in its final archived files is not a California problem. It is a continental architecture. The trucking companies operating out of Bakersfield connect to logistics networks that federal investigators have already mapped in Nevada, Arizona, Texas, and Illinois. The Port of Long Beach shipping manifest falsifications tied to a freight brokerage firm that processed $3 billion in containerized cargo annually connect to port. Operations in Houston and New Jersey, where parallel investigation teams have been running separate cases for over 2 years. In the agricultural corridors of the Central Valley, the cartel's movement infrastructure overlaps with seasonal worker trafficking routes that stretch from the California, Mexico border all the way north to Oregon and Washington state. At their peak operational tempo, these routes were moving an estimated 6 to 8 tons of combined narcotics per week: cocaine, methamphetamine, fentanyl, through agricultural supply chains that presented as entirely legitimate food system logistics. Way stations along 2 key I-5 corridor segments had been flagged for maintenance closures on at least 19 occasions that cross-referenced with Sinaloa logistics calendar. Data recovered from Vasco's servers align exactly with major northbound cartel convoy movements. The fake green energy grant structure, 4 of Vasco's shell companies had received a combined $22 million in state and federal renewable energy initiative. Funding was being used not just for money laundering, but as a construction cover for tunnel access points and underground infrastructure along 2 border-adjacent property corridors. And then there is the final file, recovered from an encrypted partition on a server in the Calabasas compound. Labeled with a code name the analysts translate as Project Permanence. It is a long-term operational plan, not a smuggling schedule, not a financial routing document, a structural plan for making California's border security and law enforcement architecture at the state administrative level permanently compatible with Sinaloa operational. Requirements: new personnel appointment recommendations, legislative interference targets, a 5-year projection for how many additional officials could be recruited or compromised to expand the protected corridor from the current 62 miles to a full 280-mile operational zone along the California-Baja border. The plan projects that by year 5, Sinaloa would have effectively achieved administrative sovereignty over the entire Southern California enforcement apparatus. Not through war, not through violence visible enough to attract federal attention, through paperwork, through patience, through the quiet redesign of a system from the inside. The lead analyst reads the final summary page of Project Permanence and sets it down on her desk. She says, this system was not infiltrated. It was being rebuilt. Rebuilt for their future, not ours. Power does not always announce itself. That is what this story forces us to understand. The most dangerous operation in California's recent history did not arrive with cartel soldiers on the street or open warfare at the border. It arrived in a press suit, with a government ID, with an office on the 14th floor of a state building and a commendation from the governor on the wall and a telephone script written for the elderly woman in Sacramento who trusted a kind voice, Think about the real cost, not the abstract $900 million. Think about 41,000 people who worked their entire lives, who built something small and careful and honest, who saved what they could, who answered the phone because they were lonely or because they believed someone needed help, and had everything taken from them by a machine designed by organized crime and protected by the very officials, sworn to stop it. Think about the neighborhoods where methamphetamine and fentanyl and cocaine moved through without interruption because the patrol grids had been quietly adjusted. Think about the families, not statistics, families, destroyed by the 2.1 million fentanyl pills that came through that tunnel. Think about the 23 people found in that transit house in Stockton, who are not numbers in a federal report, but human beings who crossed a border hoping for something better, and were instead processed into a trafficking system that existed because a man in a pressed suit decided that his ambition was worth more than their lives. This is what it looks like when organized crime stops fighting the system and starts hiring it. This is what it looks like when a drug empire does not invade, it applies for a budget allocation and gets approved. Project Ghost Ledger is ongoing. The federal investigation into the full scope of Sinaloa cartel infiltration into California's administrative and enforcement infrastructure will take years. Director Vasco's indictment runs to 214 counts. The call center prosecutions will involve defendants from 4 countries. The victim restitution process for 41,000 people who may never recover what was taken has barely begun, but something else has begun too. 1,140 federal agents went to work at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in California and dismantled something that had been growing quietly for years. They found the ledgers. They cracked the encryption. They found the tunnel and the super lab and the transit house and the server room and the sub-basement and the locked cabinet and the file called Project Permanence. They found it. And they came through the door. That matters. It matters enormously, because in the middle of everything this story reveals about what power can be corrupted into, it also shows what it looks like when enough people refuse to let it stay that way. If you are still watching, tap like so more people see this story. Because 41,000 Americans had something taken from them in silence, and the least we can do is make sure it is not forgotten in silence. Comment the word expose below if you believe this level of political infiltration needs to be dragged into the light and investigated at every level of government. And share this with someone who needs to understand that the most dangerous criminals are not always the ones you can see.